Welcome to the Independent Workforce, the podcast where we explore the now and the future of work through the lens of temporary employment, such as freelancers, contractors, fractional experts, you name it. Here we speak with CEOs, recruiters, founders, and industry leaders about how they work with independent talent, the wins, the challenges, and the lessons learned. My name is Yurii. I'm growing the freelance market at FreelancerMap, an international platform that's been connecting top independent professionals with companies for over 20 years. And my guest is Jamie Reed, a founder of BriteBirch Collective, a global consultancy built on the power of freelance talent. A fractional CMO with 20 years of experience helping brands grow through flexible, high impact marketing leadership, and a true champion of the future of work, helping companies scale with curated freelance talent while empowering independent professionals to build sustainable businesses. So, welcome, Jamie.
Thank you very much, Yuri. Great to be here.
It's been some time. I remember that we started this conversation before the first episode was out, and now it's like 20 plus episodes there. And finally, we are having this conversation. So I'm so happy to ask you all the questions that I have. And like going through your LinkedIn, I saw different words as it is in the industry, like freelancers, fractional experts, contractors. So I'm curious from your perspective, what is the difference between the words fractional and freelancer? And is there a difference?
I mean, the difference, I think, lies with the individual. It's what people want to call themselves, really, what they feel comfortable with. I think in some places, in North America, for example, freelance still holds a certain meaning. A lot of people think it has more to do with like gig work and stuff, and so people use other words to talk about the work they do. And so, no, for me, I think someone who's fractional, I believe, would probably be more higher value work, someone that has more of like a C-suite level or director level, experience that you would hire fractionally. So you could get a day a week from them and they would, provide everything that you need at that sort of decision-making level and take that away from you. That's typically when you hear fractional. But I think I've heard lots of people call themselves fractional this and that. So yeah, the terminology, as we've talked about, it's changing all the time, and there's not really a common vernacular for everything.
What are the other words that you are keep hearing here and there about the independent talent?
I mean, the way that I think of it all as the flexible workforce, because that's what it really is. It's what, if you were to talk about, there's gig work, there's independent contractors, there's solopreneurs, there's, in addition to freelance, independent talent. Like you can just, there's so many different terms for it. But I think ultimately what it all boils down to is this person's working for themselves, right? They're running their business, whether it's them or whether it's a team of them, or in my case, an agency of freelancers. But there's you're running on your own, and that's really what it comes down to, is that you're freelance. You're able to apply your skills to the clients you want to apply them to, and you can demand the sort of pay that you believe you're worth. And then it's this market of supply and demand. So
When you talk to clients, what words do they usually use, or words?
it depends. Like if it's someone that they go to regularly and that they kind of work in a full-time capacity, but they're a contractor, right? And so I think that's a lot of the time the words that employers are used to, because a contractor is someone where you're controlling their hours, you're managing, you're dictating their pay and things like that, which is they're still technically freelance in a way, because they're maybe bound by a contract, but it's not like they're employees completely. But on the flip side, they work with freelancers, and that tends to be, I think, what people perceive to be sort of like finding people through Upwork and Fiverr and this sort of thing, which I would consider, no offense to anybody, but it's lower value work. It's sort of stuff that is, creating logos and more task oriented rather than strategic work. And so I think that's really where the difference lies for a lot of companies is, am I looking at this individual as a doer of tasks, or am I looking at this individual as a thinker and a strategic advisor to my organization and to my business?
I feel like you just tapped into a very interesting topic that people are usually missing, because when they hear the word freelancer, they always think about what experience they have in their mind. Sometimes, as you said, it's just very like low key, like small paid project, and nobody really thinks about freelancers if as amazing experts with decades of experience who can just come and like lead the whole team and the whole project. So from your experience, what are the levels to freelancers?
The levels, great question. So if you go from the top down, like I'd say at a C-suite level, that's where you would have your fractional leaders. So you could have a fractional finance person, you can have a fractional chief marketing officer. I don't see so much CEOs as fractional. That's usually, the one thing that you want to make sure you have in your company. But around that CEO, you can have, fractional chief financial officers. So you really have to just, if you look at your business and you think, do I need to pay someone a C-suite salary for the whole year when I only really need them to kind of help me build out this business plan or to create this sort of, to help me figure out my run rate? Well, then you can just get a fractional CFO maybe to help you for, 6 months, a day a week. And you don't have to worry about the contracts and hiring and firing, right? Like, I mean, the amount of time that you need to put into hiring someone at that level is usually 6 months in an organization. So you save all of that time. In a way, you're kind of testing this person out. In a lot of ways, I think fractional C-suite can, come on for longer. Once they understand your business and they get into the teeth of your business, well, now maybe you're bringing them on 3 days a week. And eventually they could end up becoming your full-time CFO. And so I've seen that happen in multiple ways. Underneath CFO, you kind of have this sort of director level, more consultant level type of freelancer, which I think is, definitely a lot more entering the workforce. So these would be sort of your middle management, director to manager level within an organization who are now maybe finding themselves without a job. Rather than going back into the rat race, they're looking at, hey, I can sell my services. I'm really good at a subject matter or things like that. And so they're able to go in and build a bank of business for themselves around maybe a specific topic or industry. And then one step below that, you'd have sort of like your creative workforce, I think, which is more sort of what you would find through Fiverr and Upwork, and you'd be able to hire them to deliver a task or an output. And then probably, below that would be sort of your gig worker, where, your people that are working through a platform like Uber or, a ride share or a grocery delivery, app or something like that. And they're also, they're part-time freelance. It's, once you start getting into like the part-time work area, like are part-timers freelancers, like it starts to get kind of hard to define. But I think, that hierarchy of talent slash, you're paying for what you get, but you're also getting a higher value person with more experience as you sort of move up that ladder.
So let's start from top down. So we have this, as you've said, Uber kind of like users, kind of like gig workers. Then we have this creative or like professionals with experience who can bring their knowledge and stuff. Then we have like this directors and C-suite. So if we understand where we get gig workers and a little bit understanding where we get creatives, maybe you can also add to them. But where do you get each type of professionals? Where do you find them?
Yeah, great question. So I mean, I could plug my own agency a little bit, but I think generally there are platforms that, more and more companies themselves, like even consultancies like Deloitte, I know have something called Open Talent Network or Open Talent, Deloitte Open Talent, and they're building their own bank of freelance talent that they can tap into as they need to. Um, and so I think you may have to go out and curate them yourself because they're not always, organized in big organizations. But a lot of professional freelance organizations, a lot of sort of fractional groups, like they do have ways that you can outreach to them and identify, talent through those platforms. And even, Fiverr and Upwork, they realize that there's different levels to this. And so, people that build enough bank of business and become, have enough experience can kind of become a premium service member within those platforms. And so they too kind of start to build themselves out and work at sort of those higher director levels.
When we're talking about the levels to independent talent, there are also levels to people who hire them because it can be like a small business where there is one owner, maybe a few teammates, and it's easier to hire this person. Then we can have like medium to large businesses that, okay, not going to large, but medium, where it's like still a bigger team, but there is not that much bureaucracy. And then we have corporate world where it's close to impossible to hire freelancers because you need some compliance check-ins and all the things. And then you have to work through some kind of a vendor. So what level of businesses do you see from your professional, and how, okay, not how, but what blocks them or what prevents them from hiring this independent talent?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I worked with all sorts of businesses, from brand new startups getting off the ground to very established, like multinational top 100 companies. And I think at the end of the day, they all look at the, you know, they they ultimately want the problem solved, right? They want that's really what they're looking for. And I don't think like the people that hire us tend to care who's solving the business, right? But then within the organizations, like you were explaining, like the bigger they become, the harder it is to kind of crack through their systems and things like that. And so working with a startup, super easy for freelancers because everyone's just sort of like rolling up their sleeves, getting the work done. It feels very collaborative. In fact, you feel like you're part of this you're a founder of this organization as well. And so definitely there's that. But the downside is that you're working with someone that, may not have two pennies to rub together. And so you're not getting paid as much, or if all of a sudden things don't work out, you're not getting paid at all. And there's a lot of risk for working with startups when you're freelance. Mid-size companies, I think, are the sweet spot. It's where my business focuses, and it's really because there's sort of, when you look at the options for outside outsourced talent. So whether you're looking at consultancies or you're looking at agencies or anything like that, these are big, well-oiled machines that are sort of running, and they've got a system in place. And you as a client tend to just be sort of put through that process, meat grinder. And you can get great results. Don't get me wrong. Like agencies and consultancies can do really big, great thinking, but you're working within their system. The difference I find is that, when you're a mid-sized company, you want to go to one of those big agencies, you just get absorbed inside their machine and you kind of just become one of many thousands clients. Your team's constantly changing. You're paying through the teeth for meetings upon meetings and administration and hidden costs and things like that. And it can really eat away at your budgets and stuff. On the flip side, you go to Fiverr and Upwork, and you're kind of, your problem that you're trying to solve is a little bit more complex. And so you don't just need one person, like one freelancer. You probably need a few people, a few different talents that you need to make sure they're working together and they're collaborating. And that's also very difficult for those mid-sized companies. And so what I find where I focus my energy is placing those kinds of mid-level talents, like the up to C-suite. I mean, like we have fractional CFOs too, but a lot of us are like director level. Everyone's got a minimum 10 years experience. So we're not talking about junior people, but really specialized experts who, we build the team that the client needs. So rather than having to go to, say, in a marketing context, I go to a PR agency because I need PR, but I also need a digital agency for my digital stuff, and I need to build a website, so I have to get a website team. And so you're now working with all these different outsourced agencies. Instead, what we'll do is we'll just take the different marketing expertise, and we'll build the team for you. And so I find that when you start to explain that to those mid-level companies, they start to understand, like, okay, well, I'm not herding cats through Fiverr and Upwork and through these platforms, and I'm not also having to pay through the teeth to get maybe not the greatest level of service for through bigger organizations. Freelancers can be the perfect sweet spot where you can still work collaboratively with them. You can have your high level freelancers that are helping to sit around the board table with you, giving you advice on the business. At the same time, you could have under them a couple smaller freelancers who are executing and getting the work done. And so you can build an outsourced team that you can just turn on and off as you'd like. And I think once companies understand that, it's like, oh, I'm not hiring those people. I don't have to contract them. I don't have to pay insurance for them, but they're delivering on projects as opposed to in a long term, like I don't have to pay for them in a long term way. It really allows companies to flex and to move fast and to focus on the job at hand rather than having to plan out 3 years. You know what I mean? Like I don't know why people plan so far these days because the world changes now every week. So having a 5-year plan feels to me like a little bit wishful thinking.
Yeah, you mentioned that once companies understand that, and I feel like that's exactly what's going on right now in the markets, that some companies are just starting to understand. And I'm curious from your experience, what stops them? What is blocking them from understanding this superpower that they are leaving untouched?
Yeah, I love that you use the word superpowers too, because I do sometimes feel like that's the case when I'm working with a client and they have, they're say a very specific technology company that has a very specific audience and a very specific use case for their product. And then I have someone on my team that comes from that industry and understand, like where would they find that from, if they hired an agency and things like that. And so it really is, it's like bringing someone with a very specific superpower to your team. Um, these are the sorts of benefits I think where it's maybe more difficult to manage. I think a lot of companies, the blockers to your question, are really more to do with how they look at talent and how they look at um, I guess organizing outsourced vendors. And so it really does, I find, come down to the systems that are already existing in these organizations, and companies don't know where to put a freelancer. And the biggest challenge I always see is that they treat them like vendors, and so they go through procurement, and so you're dealing with contracts and you're dealing with um, people that are used to buying computer terminals and other types of things where it's like, oh, I want, if you're going to sell me one for 20, I want 20 for one, and you try to haggle and bargain, and this is a human being, right? And it's like you can't put them in the same category. It should be HR that's dealing with them. It should be more of like a human resource type of person that understands that, this is a person that's feeding their family and that they have needs and wants and that they're motivated by different things, not just money. So that's to me where I think the switch is going to start happening is as we help these companies understand that, think of freelance talent more as an extension of your workforce than as an outsourced vendor. And I think that's going to be the first step to solving a lot of the challenges they might have in trying to get freelancers to work for them. And when I say, and I purposely say that work for them because they don't understand the power dynamic is different. And if a freelancer who's really great talent, who's that perfect superpower for your needs, doesn't enjoy working with you, doesn't find the process easy, doesn't get paid on time, doesn't, get treated like a person, but instead like a vendor, they might do one project for you, but then you're never, they're going to go work for your competitor. And so you need to be nurturing these people. You need to be thinking of them as you do employees, right? And it's like, oh, I see the potential in this person being a long-term value to our organization. Maybe they're not going to be an employee. I can't force them to work for me, but I can help them want to work for me. I can help them, understand my business in a way that they can add so much value because they are gaining also experience outside of the organization. And that's another thing that I think companies don't realize is that when you're bringing this talent, they're going out in the world and experiencing other things too, and then they're bringing that knowledge back. When you're working just with employees who've been there for 20 years, they gain a lot of like very specific knowledge, but they don't. You also start to kind of have blinders on, and you don't really understand always what the world's doing, and so it's a really, that's why we call it like a blended workforce is ideal, where you can have on and off freelancers and you can have your permanent employees and you can make sure everything's working together. But you can't do that if you've got procurement handling one side of the equation and HR handling the other.
This episode of The Independent Workforce is brought to you by FreelancerMap, the home of freelancing. Whether you are looking to hire top freelance talent fast or a freelancer ready to find your next big project, FreelancerMap connects the right people with the right work. No endless job boards, no guesswork, just direct access to verified experts and opportunities across the globe. Visit freelancermap.com and start building your next success story today. You reminded me too of previous podcast conversation. It was Ray Culver who told that talent choosing to work this way. It's not companies choosing freelancers, but talent choose freelancers. And if you are not tapping into this workforce, you might be lacking of talents very soon. And also Matthew Knight, who told that we are talking to each other. Freelancers are talking to each other. So heard freelancer one time, heard freelancer a second time. No one will want to work with your company in the near future and maybe even forever. So it's always like, combining those two pieces companies have to be really really careful. As you've said, they have to treat freelancers not just as a software, but as a human, as they are, as a business. And also it's interesting that as you've mentioned, if a company is working with some kind of consultants, like big consulting firm like Deloitte, Ernst and Young, they are ready to pay a ton of money and to get some work done from them, and they are not ready to pay like super small amount of money of that they're paying to those firms to an independent talent to get sometimes even better work done, because many of those talents, they were working before in those companies, they have all those experiences, they have all those systems and processes, and they deliver the same, sometimes even bigger quality. So what do you think prevents companies, like what stops them from going to independent talent and keep going to those bigger consultancies?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's sort of what I was trying to solve with BriteBirch was this idea that freelancers on their own are challenging to work with when you're trying to solve more complex problems. Um, I used to work in agencies. I loved the idea of like bringing in the best of all of, the PR experts and the ad agency experts and bringing all these experts together and creating campaigns and stuff that multi-market. So you've got teams that are in different places and these sort of, you're solving complex problems and putting out these big, results and big campaigns. But then on your own, you kind of can't do that, right? You don't like you. At the end of the day, you can have all the talent in the world, but you still need other people to work with. And we live in a world where you still have to interact and you still have to be partnering with people and powers combined and all that. So the biggest sort of blocker I think that companies have is that they look at freelancers and they think that's not enough, or I can't justify having to bring you on board and all that stuff. And they feel like there's this huge learning curve. They don't realize there's always going to be a discovery phase when they work with a big agency or a big consultancy too. They're going to have to like learn about your business and stuff. But more often than not, they're taking a playbook off of the shelf, dusting it off, and then just changing the names in it and giving you a report. I think it's safe to say that there's a lot of companies that hire those big organizations because they're safe, because they're almost like an insurance. Oh, Deloitte told me that this was the right business decision, so it's not my fault. Like I think there is a use case of those large organizations using those types of consultancies in that way. When you get again down into that sort of mid-level B2B kind of company, they're looking at freelancers and just thinking it's hard. Just thinking like, oh man, I don't want to manage 12 different people or five different people. I think they're having a hard time reconciling in their own mind. Like, well, if I hire an agency, they already are just running. They already know what they're doing. I don't have to put the pieces together. And so what we did at BriteBirch, we're like, well, we can put the pieces together for you. We can build this sort of like network of high value team members who all specialize in different ways, and then we'll build the team for you. And you can know that there's an organization, there is a shared values, there are shared ideals, and there's a team that is committed to a strategic output, not just a bunch of doers who are just sort of you have to manage. And I think when they understand that there's like one person kind of managing the team, that team is synergized and that team can be flexible for you so that if you need this person now, you can turn them on. If you don't need them, you turn them off. And you don't have to pay people to sit around, which is like you do in agencies and stuff. So there's once they start waking up to that, and then when they see the results and they get to actually work hand in hand, and it's a more of a partnership than a vendor relationship, then they start to really understand like, oh, there's a strategic value to working like this. And that's about the time when these sort of older B2B organizations start to rethink and they start operating more lean. They start to see their competitors, operating a little bit more lean. And so then they start to do that too. Maybe they have some layoffs, but then they hire those people back as freelancers. Like I'm seeing that a lot more and more, where it's like, you have the talent, you have the institutional knowledge. Sorry, we don't want to work for you, or we can't hire you, but we can bring you on as a freelancer. And in a way, the freelancer is making more money now because they're not paying out all this extra stuff, but then also the company's saving money because they're not paying for all the insurance and having the employee. And the freelancer can go and work for 50% for this company, and then they can go work 50% for their dream, their dream gig, or like to go do art on the side or things like that, or go to their kids' basketball game, which, is something that we haven't talked about yet, but that's definitely one of the benefits of being able to choose your own jobs and your own work is, you can set your own work-life balance. So.
And, and I feel like in the setting is the government who think that they lose because they think that everyone wants to trick them not to pay taxes, but they don't really see that that's just how it's changing because those independent professionals that are still paying taxes, they're still buying insurance, and they're still buying like other businesses, and other businesses are still paying taxes. They're missing out on this. And, I sometimes feel that there is a corporate business and there is an entrepreneur, and someone in between as a freelancer. There is no such category for some reason.
Yeah.
Hopefully it will change in the future. And also, to your point, you were talking about trust to those bigger companies, that if someone you hire Deloitte, you tell it's them told me what to do, I'm safe. Like there is no my responsibility. And it reminded me in one of the previous episodes, Danny Gall told that every person in a corporate world, they still want to safeguard themselves because they need to be safe, and sometimes they need to move responsibility somewhere else. So if we are not talking about Deloitte, if there is a person who is choosing to work with independent talent, how can they safeguard themselves in this scenario?
I think both sides need to safeguard themselves. And so this is it comes down to like being a professional. And if you're a freelancer and you have a contract, right? If you've got something on paper that says this is how I work, this is what you can expect, I think already in the mind of the person hiring you, you're more professional. You know what you're doing. If you've got set hours, if you're just more strict with how you operate, um, in the mind of the person trying to hire you, you're more professional and you're more trustworthy in a way. If you come in and just be like, "Oh yeah, I can do whatever," and you're kind of like super flexible, that can be a benefit. Don't get me wrong, but at the end of the day, like these are businesses and these are corporations, and they're looking for contracts. They're looking like, I know it's a burden on everybody, but like it's also a safeguard. Have insurance. Have like through Bright Start, which is a broader community that we have adjacent to BriteBirch. We're providing now cybersecurity training, so you can get certified as someone who's been trained as a freelancer for cybersecurity purposes, because more and more companies are getting hacked through their vendors. And everyone with a laptop is running a multi-million-dollar business now, but it's one laptop. It's not like a whole IT department protecting you. So there's these realities that I think we're all waking up to. And so companies, if they're looking and they've got three people in front of them, and this person, they all have the same CV and they all have the same capability, but this person has cybersecurity certificate and has a really tight contract, I'm going to choose them because they're showing me that they're more professional. They're thinking about my perspective as the person hiring. I need someone I can trust and is dependable, but that isn't going to come back and bite me. So I think that's, on both sides, I think looking for those types of professional agreements, professional steps, take the time it takes to go through the process of getting the project set up, because you do not want to have to go back later when you're not getting paid you know, and you don't have something in writing. So I think it's good. It's protection for everybody.
We were talking a lot about how beneficial working with independent talent is, with freelancers, etc. How they are faster to hire, how they can be cheaper if we think about all the extra payments that companies are doing for full-time experts, how they're bringing more experience, and how faster they do projects. Okay, I will not talk about all the freelancers and all the independent talent, but it's up to them, because if you are doing a shitty job, no one will ever hire you. So at least most of them are trying to keep the standard. But let's watch a little bit on this dark side of the moon, not just the bright side of freelancing. What other problems that freelancers can cause to companies?
I think it's probably similar to any employee, really, or any other vendor. So if they're not insured and they come in and they make decisions and they have access to your internal servers and they delete the wrong files and it depends on how much access you give them if they're at arm's length. If you set them up like a proper HR system and you set them up with like IT and IT understands that this is a freelancer and they can work with you and your laptop and help build in protections, then I think you can mitigate a lot of that stuff. So it really just comes down to understanding the way that they work. Um, if you know that they're going to be traveling a lot and working from airports and stuff, like there's a lot of dangers there from a cybersecurity standpoint, cafes and stuff. So there's like, cybersecurity is definitely one area. I think the other area could just be work quality. You need to do your vetting. You need to make sure that, people are really good at selling themselves. So unless you're working through an organization like ours where we can vouch for the people, you're going to have to do your own due diligence and you're going to have to interview them like you would interview them as like an employee or something. Make your decision, but they may not work out just like employees sometimes don't. So take your time, do your due diligence. So the biggest problems I see are that they can waste your time and they can waste your money if you don't take the right approach. But in terms of like pure damage, I mean, it just really depends on what you're giving them access to. Like if you have someone as a chief financial, like a fractional chief CFO, and they're like in your books and they're able to make decisions and things like that, then you need to be pretty careful that you're hiring someone who's ethical. So it's the same problems that you would have with hiring anybody, really. It's just maybe you have a different recourse because instead of being able to fire them and whatever you're able to do as an employer, I mean, you can still fire them and you can still sort of rip up a contract and you can still take people to court and so I would say that the risks are minimal in comparison to any other kind of employee. The upsides are much more though.
I think it's a very important moment that you mentioned that companies are thinking that freelancers are something different, but those are still humans, those are still businesses. They are still interested in bringing the best work without like with do no harm policy because they are not interested in doing this. But if they are want to, I don't know, hack your computer system or whatever, what prevents them from like starting to work with you full time? You know, we see a lot of movies out there of how people from within the company are hacking systems and like taking millions away. But I feel like it's more of a spy movie fear that companies have. But
A bad person is a bad person. A good person is a
yeah.
good person. And like, if you don't know the difference, I'm sorry, I can't help you. Like, there's like, the fears, one of the big fears that I think a lot of companies have are like the team, right? So when we build a team and we put, a client architect at the center of that team, um, a lot of the times clients are like, well, but if they're not your employees, how can you guarantee that they're going to show up for me? And how do you guarantee that they're going to do a good job? My answer to that is really always like they're going to do a better job because they've got to put food on the table. This is their livelihood. This is their company, right? So there's less chance of them fluffing off and not doing what they're supposed to. They're also more mature. Like the people that we're dealing with, I mean, in BriteBirch, everyone's got that experience already. And so I did that on purpose because I don't want to have to handhold and do that sort of thing. I wanted people that already kind of understood their job and what they were good at, and I could plug them into teams and they could just be specialists at what they do. And when I explained that to clients that, when I worked at agency behind the scenes, we were losing people all the time. The churn was real. I think it was like 30%. And so they don't always see that and they're protected from that. Here, we're transparent about it. If you don't like someone on your team, we can plug and play someone else. We can, if you want more of someone, we can, communicate that to them and be transparent and get them to participate more. And so it's really they're still the client. They still get to make decisions. It's not like we take over and they don't have any more decision-making power. It's sort of, once you bring them on, it's a relationship. So over time, the freelancer knows your business more. You understand how to work with them better. And then that's why I think that's the other value of maintaining a freelancer network and having sort of your consistent freelancers that you want to trust and nurture is because over time they become so ingrained in your business and they understand your business maybe sometimes better than new employees and stuff like that. And so that's really the benefit that a lot of companies miss out on too, is like your freelancers aren't one and done. They should be, you should be nurturing them and you should be thinking about ways of bringing them more into the fold of your organization. Invite them to your trainings, invite them to um, your team dinners sometimes, right? Because they're part of your team and they're working with your employees. And the more like those little things mean a lot to us as freelancers, I think, because we miss out on a lot of the social aspects, on a lot of that sort of thing. So the more we can be brought in on that stuff, the more that we're going to be endeared to that organization. And if we have to pick between, two competing companies that want to hire us, we're going to choose the one that, that we understand better and that has been treating us better. And so, it comes down again to those power dynamics shifting.
I'm gonna choose the one that is more human. So
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah. And that gives me like a better work-life balance. Like people's motivations are very unique to themselves, but again, you're not going to know what those things are that are motivating them unless you treat them like people instead of like vendors.
yeah, if you could design the effective three-step system for bringing freelancers in, what would it look like?
It would look very similar to potentially the steps that you would take for hiring someone. You would start with, obviously a call for support. If you don't have your own pool of freelancers that you can just actively tap into, then you need to reach out to platforms and things like that. Once you get a whole bunch of them, you need to vet them. So you got to do some preliminary screenings and calls. Oh, these people, here's a short list. They have great personality. They have the right experience. Perfect. Then you just start doing an interview process. And I don't see why you need to think of it differently. I mean, think of it as an investment. How much money are you, like, what's your budget? If you're putting $1 million in the hands of this person, you want to interview them. If it's only a $10,000 project, maybe you're not going to be as you're not going to scrutinize as much. So for me, I think it really comes down to like, yeah, just going through the right motions. And then, again, it's an HR thing. I'm not talking about procurement. I'm talking about HR identifies, hey, this person, here's the top couple people. And then the project person, interviews them and gets involved. And then they make a decision. And then there you go. You contract them. They're now part of the team. They're doing the work. And you can if they're working out, then you can dial them up. You can be like, hey, I want an extra couple hours a week from you, or and if they're not working, you can dial them down. And I think that's the difference, is like when you hire someone, it's like they're there every day. You're paying for them. You've made that decision. But when they're a freelancer, you can, it's much more flexible. That's why I call it the flexible workforce. So
You make it very easy, and I totally understand that it is easy. It's not that hard that some companies think it is. It's so much easier when you really put your focus and interest in it, when you build systems and processes, and afterwards you just get so much benefits. But yeah, hopefully market is going there. I know it's going there, so we will see it in the nearest future. And Jamie, I wish to have the sky's the limit, but time is the limit. So the final question, what advice would you give to companies just starting to use freelancers and freelancers just entering the market?
So I think there's a lot of both of those right now, because as we're seeing, a lot of companies are cutting employees. There's a lot of people that are entering the world of work and they're realizing like maybe I should try to do things on my own. And so that's again where we created Bright Start to help those people that are just entering this workforce. And so we see a lot of people, different industries. Some people are starting up their own storefronts, and some people are, starting to freelance and offer their services. For them, I would say get yourself figured out first. You can get into a lot of trouble by just jumping in and trying to do work. And then maybe you get a client and you're like, yes, I'm getting paid. But then as soon as you stop getting paid, you're like in a huge hole because you don't know where your next company is coming from. You don't know where like your next paycheck's coming from. Plus you haven't set up the systems and everything. So really think through like who you're selling to, how you're going to reach them, how you're going to build a bank of business, get some legal advice on your contracts, get some advice on insurance and stuff. Protect your belt. This is your business. It's a lot of freelancers think that they're just going to go and do a job and it's going to be this great sort of thing where it's like you're working under the table for, maybe if that's what you want, like you can do that sort of thing. But if you want this to be a career and you want to put your kids through college, you need to treat it like a business. And so that would be my advice to freelancers. To companies just starting out, it's kind of the same sort of thing, but in reverse. I would say like start with the professionals, start with the people that have their shit together and that know sort of they show you a contract and they show you those things. And because they're the ones that have figured themselves out and they treating themselves like a business. And when they treat themselves like a business, they're gonna do well for you because they're taking it seriously. I guess is sort of my there's a lot of people dipping their toes. There's a lot of people coming out of retirement being like, maybe I'll freelance, and they're dipping their toes into things. Be careful because those are the ones that may kind of all of a sudden disappear halfway through the project because it's not vibing for them. You need to find people that are going to set a contract. You're going to set a timeline. There's deliverables. Treat it like they're not buddies. They're not your friends. They are, as much as they're vendors and subcontractors, treat them like people, but you can contract them like vendors still. You can still sort of manage them in a way that is, obviously professional. It's not just your buddy. You're not, someone's just not like helping you out with these favors. You're contracting them. They're doing a job for you. So you need to still treat them in that sort of professional manner. So yeah, that's really, it's easy to fall into that trap for small companies, especially to kind of be like, oh, I'm bringing on a freelancer. And it's like, there's no real contract and there's no real agreement. And then at the end, no one's happy because you haven't really set those expectations and everyone just jumps into the work. So just be careful about that stuff. Really set those parameters, know what you want, then go find the person, contract them for what you need them to do, and just take the extra step at the beginning to make the ending much more smoother for everybody. And that goes on both sides of the equation.
Last but not least, name 2 people I should reach out to talk about the independent workforce.
I mean, I'll be honest with you. I have yet to meet like so many HR or like I've been trying to identify and build those types of connections, but it's been challenged. If you're interested in the sort of freelance cybersecurity question, Greg Lepard is our partner from Cybersnap that I think would have a really great perspective on what companies should look out for, but also what freelancers should look out for in the cybersecurity space. Who else? I mean, I'm pretty sure you were talking about Matt Knight, and I think you've spoken to probably a lot of the other people that I would recommend that you speak to. So, yeah, I'll just leave it with Greg at this point, I guess.
Got it. And the final question. What is one question that I should have asked you about the freelance market but didn't?
Is it possible to get rich?
Is it a quick answer?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that.
Got it. Jamie, thank you so much for this conversation. We've been waiting for this for some time, but here we are, here we're sharing. And thank you a lot for building this market, for building not just for yourself and as of being a freelancer, but also for bringing this expert together and becoming this kind of like translator from the company's language to freelancers and vice versa, and making this connection happen. And yes, thank you so much for sharing all this experience that you've and answering to all of my questions.
Well, thank you for everything you're doing too, Yuri, bringing a lot of light to this new kind of way of working and getting people aware of the opportunities, the risks, and treating it like what it is, which is I think a new market, a new opportunity, and I think those organizations that jump on this opportunity early are going to be the ones that succeed. So
yeah, and Jamie, see you in the freelance market. And for listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of the Independent Workforce. I hope you've taken one step closer to working smarter with freelance talent. If you enjoyed this conversation, subscribe to learn even more and share it with your colleague. And remember, the future of work is now.